Out. The day Owen Schaffer wheeled a rust-stained engine block into the Midwest Industrial Expo, people stopped talking. Not because they were impressed, because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The convention center in Indianapolis was the kind of place that made a man feel small even before anyone opened their mouth. 40-foot ceilings. Polished concrete floors that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. Out. Booths from Cummins, Caterpillar, Bosch. Corporations that spent more on their display lighting than most people earned in a year. And right there, rolling past all of it on a borrowed hand truck with one squeaky wheel, was Owen Schaffer, 53 years old, grease under his fingernails that no amount of soap had ever fully removed. A blue mechanic's shirt with his name stitched above the pocket in faded thread. The engine sat on a piece of quarter-inch steel plate he'd welded himself. Out. It wasn't pretty. It had never been meant to be pretty. 12 years of weekends and late nights lived inside that block. 12 years of skipped vacations, of cold coffee gone forgotten on a workbench, of crawling out from underneath the thing at 2 in the morning because his back gave out and his knees ached and he still had to be at the shop by 6. Out. 12 years of his daughter Nora asking why Dad spent so much time in the garage, and Owen not having an answer that made sense to a 10-year-old, or a 16-year-old, or a 22-year-old. He'd registered for the expo 6 weeks earlier, filling out the online form at the kitchen table after Nora had gone to bed. The application asked for a company name. He typed Schaffer Engine Works. He didn't have a company. He had a garage in Terre Haute, Indiana, a P.O. box, and an engine that he believed, quietly, stubbornly, with the kind of belief that doesn't need anyone else's permission, could change the way industrial compressors consumed fuel. The registration fee was $400. He'd put it on a card he was still paying off. His assigned space was booth 214, tucked near the back of the hall between a hydraulic parts distributor from Michigan and an empty table where a no-show from Ohio had been scheduled. Out. Owen set up a folding table he'd brought from home, laid out 2 laminated spec sheets he'd printed at Kinko's, and positioned the engine so the modified cylinder head faced forward. He'd built a small display board out of foam core and printed the efficiency numbers in a font large enough to read from 6 feet away. He stood behind it all and waited. For the first 2 hours, almost nobody stopped. Out. People glanced at the engine, glanced at him, and kept walking toward the bigger booths with the LED displays and the corporate reps in matching polo shirts. Owen poured himself coffee from a thermos Nora had given him for his birthday. She'd had it engraved, "Keep going, Dad," and he stood there and drank it and didn't let his face show what he was feeling. Around 11 o'clock, a man in a charcoal suit stopped in front of the booth. His name badge said Gregory Harlan, Out, VP of Procurement, Veltron Industrial Systems. Veltron was one of the largest manufacturers of commercial refrigeration compressors in North America. Their logo was on a banner the size of a house 3 booths over. Gregory Harlan looked at the engine. He looked at the spec sheet. He looked at Owen. "You build this yourself?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Owen said. Harlan picked up the spec sheet, read it for about 4 seconds, and set it back down. Out. "These numbers can't be right there," Owen said. "I've got the test data if you want to see it." Harlan smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile. "Listen, friend, I've been in this industry for 26 years. I've seen a lot of guys come in here with a great idea in a box." He gestured at the engine without touching it. "What you've got here it's a project, a hobby. You want to impress somebody, go win a county fair blue ribbon." He straightened his badge. "Out. This floor is for industry, not a machine shop." He walked away. Owen watched him go. He picked up his thermos and took a long sip. He did not leave. What Gregory Harlan did not know, what most people at that expo did not know, was where that engine had come from. Not the garage in Terre Haute. Further back than that, Owen Schaffer had been a mechanic since he was 17, working weekends at his uncle's shop outside of Bloomington. He hadn't gone to college, hadn't wanted to. Out. Machines made sense to him in a way that classrooms never had. The logic of them, the honesty of them. A machine either worked or it didn't. There was no arguing with it. He'd married at 28. His wife Diane had been a dental hygienist with a laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants. They had Nora in 2001. Those were good years. Out. Owen had his own shop by then, a small operation on the south end of Terre Haute. Engine rebuilds, industrial equipment, the kind of heavy mechanical work that requires patience and precision and a willingness to get dirty. He was good at it, not famous, not rich, good. Then Diane got sick. It started as fatigue, which they both assumed was from long shifts. Out. Then came the other symptoms, the ones that sent them to a specialist and then another specialist, and then a room where a doctor sat across a desk and said the kind of sentences that changed the shape of time. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, diagnosed on a Tuesday in March when Nora was 9 years old. Owen kept the shop open through all of it. He had to. Out. The insurance helped, but it didn't cover everything, and Nora needed stability, and Owen had decided, the kind of quiet iron decision a man makes alone, that he would hold everything together no matter what it cost him personally. He drove Diane to treatment twice a week. He packed Nora's lunches. He answered phone calls from customers about engine rebuilds while sitting in hospital waiting rooms, his voice steady, because that was the job. Diane died 18 months after the diagnosis. Nora was 11. The engine started as grief. Owen couldn't sleep in those first months. The house was too quiet in a way that felt physical. Like pressure on the chest, he started spending the nights in the garage. At first he just tinkered, rebuilt a carburetor he didn't need, reorganized his tool drawers for the fourth time. But then an idea started forming. He'd been working on a commercial compressor for a refrigeration client, and something about the valve timing had been bothering him for months. A theoretical question. What if you could recover the thermal energy typically lost in the compression cycle and redirect it to reduce fuel consumption? Not partially, substantially. He started sketching on legal pads. Then building, small prototypes at first, then bigger. He read everything he could find. Thermodynamics textbooks from the library, engineering journals online, patent filings from the 1970s and 80s that nobody was looking at anymore because the industry had moved on. He taught himself what he hadn't learned in school, one concept at a time, at a workbench in a one-car garage in Indiana while his daughter slept 20 feet away on the other side of a drywall wall. Nora would come out sometimes on Saturday mornings and find him still awake, blueprints spread across the workbench, coffee cold, face lit by a work lamp. She never told him to quit. She'd pull up a stool and sit with him and ask questions. Real questions, not the kind kids ask to be polite. She wanted to understand what he was building. He explained it to her in pieces year after year as she grew old enough to understand more. By the time she was in high school, she could read his efficiency calculations. By college, she was catching arithmetic errors. The engine he brought to Indianapolis was the 9th prototype. 8 previous versions had failed in various ways: cracked seals, heat transfer problems, a valve configuration that worked in theory and collapsed spectacularly in practice. Prototype 4 had caught fire, not badly. Just enough to remind him that the gap between an idea and a working machine is where most dreams go to die. Prototype 9 had run for 640 hours on a test rig he'd built in the shop. He had documentation. He had data logs printed from a monitoring system he'd cobbled together from off-the-shelf components and programmed himself by watching YouTube tutorials and reading forum threads at midnight. The efficiency gains were real. He'd had them independently verified by an engineering professor at Indiana State who owed him a favor after Owen had rebuilt the man's vintage tractor engine. He stood behind that engine all day in booth 214. Gregory Harlan's comment had carried. That was the thing about a convention floor, voices traveled. 2 reps from a fluid power company nearby had heard it and exchanged a look. A woman from a trade publication had glanced up from her laptop and then looked back down. Owen had seen all of it and registered none of it on his face. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a man came and stood in front of the booth for a long time without saying anything. He was maybe 60, heavyset, wearing a sport coat over a flannel shirt in a combination that suggested he hadn't thought very hard about what to put on that morning. His badge said Wendell Price, though it didn't list a company. He read both spec sheets. He walked around the engine and looked at it from all sides. He crouched down to look at the underside of the cylinder head, which was not something most people at an industrial expo would have thought to do. "You run this?" he asked. 640 hours, Owen said, on a test rig. "I've got the logs, thermal recovery on the compression stroke. Modified heat exchanger integrated into the exhaust manifold. The redirection happens before the energy dissipates." Wendell Price stood up slowly and looked at Owen directly. "Where'd you study?" "I didn't. I've got a shop in Terre Haute." Price was quiet for a moment. "What are you asking for it?" Owen had thought about this question for 6 weeks. He'd written numbers down and crossed them out. He'd talked to Nora on the phone about it. She was in Columbus now, working in supply chain logistics, calling every Sunday. He named the number he'd settled on. Wendell Price nodded slowly, not in agreement but in the way someone nods when they're doing math in their head. "I'm going to come back," Price said. "Don't let anyone else take those spec sheets." He came back at 4 o'clock. With 2 other men Owen didn't recognize. They asked technical questions for 40 minutes. Owen answered every one of them. He pulled out his binder 3 inches thick with tabbed sections for design iterations, test data, material specs, thermal modeling, and the independent engineering review, and walked them through it page by page with the calm of a man who has been preparing for this conversation for 12 years. The 2 men with Price asked him to step aside for a few minutes. Owen stepped aside. He drank the last of his thermos coffee, which was cold. He looked around the convention floor at the Veltron banner and the Caterpillar display and Gregory Harlan across the room laughing with someone near the complimentary bar. He looked at the engraving on the thermos. "Keep going, Dad." He looked back at Wendell Price and the 2 men huddled together talking. Then Price walked back over. "We'd like to put this in front of a room," Price said. "Private presentation. Week after next. Can you make that happen?" Owen said he could make that happen. Out. The meeting was in Chicago. 17th floor of a building on Wacker Drive, with a conference room that looked out over the river. Owen wore his best shirt, which was a button-down he'd bought at Kohl's for Nora's college graduation. He brought the binder. He brought a laptop with a presentation Nora had helped him build over 2 long evenings on FaceTime, her coaching him through the slides while he grumbled about fonts. There were 11 people in the room. Out. Owen didn't know most of their names at first. He learned them by their questions. A woman named Patricia Cross, who ran a private equity group that invested in industrial technology. 2 engineers from a firm outside of Detroit. A man named Robert Chung, who Owen later learned had been involved in 3 separate industrial acquisitions in the past 5 years. Out. And Wendell Price, sitting near the end of the table with his flannel collar visible under his sport coat, watching Owen with an expression of patient attention. Owen sat up. He took a breath. He thought about the garage in Terre Haute and the legal pads and Diane and Nora asking questions from a stool on a Saturday morning. And then he presented. He spoke for 40 minutes without notes. Out. The engineering, the design evolution, the 8 failures before the one that worked, the 640 hours on the test rig. He showed the efficiency numbers. He showed the independent review. He showed the material costs and the projected manufacturing path and the market he believed this engine could access if someone built the infrastructure to take it there. The room was quiet in a way that felt different from the convention floor. Out. When he finished, Patricia Cross said, "Walk me through the thermal recovery mechanism one more time." He walked her through it. She asked 2 more questions. The engineers from Detroit asked 4. Robert Chung didn't ask anything. He just wrote in a notebook. Then Patricia Cross looked around the table in a way that seemed to close a conversation that hadn't been spoken out loud. "Mr. Schaffer," she said, "we'd like to make an offer." Owen kept his face still. Out. "I'm listening." What happened next was not a single offer. It was a sequence. 3 of the groups in the room, independently, named figures within 40 minutes of each other, each one larger than the last, until the number on the table was not the number Owen had named in Indianapolis and not any number he had written down and crossed out in the 6 weeks before the expo. It was larger. It was considerably larger. Out. Owen sat with it for a moment, the way a person sits with something that doesn't quite fit inside normal comprehension yet. Then he asked for 24 hours. He called Nora from the parking garage under the building on Wacker Drive. It was raining and the garage echoed, and he sat in his truck with the engine off. "They made an offer," he said. "Dad." Her voice was careful. "How much?" he told her. There was a silence on the line that stretched for several seconds. Out. "Dad," she said again, differently. "Yeah," he said. Are you okay?" He thought about that. He thought about the garage and Diane and the 8 engines that didn't work and the 4th one that caught fire, and the cold coffee and the squeaky wheel on the hand truck, and Gregory Harlan's smile that wasn't a smile, and Wendell Price crouching down to look at the underside of the cylinder head. "I think so," Owen said. "Yeah, I think I'm okay." The deal closed 9 weeks later. Out. Owen kept the shop in Terre Haute. He hired 2 mechanics he'd known for years and told them nothing had changed because mostly nothing had. He still came in most mornings. He still had grease under his fingernails that soap didn't fully reach. He still drank bad coffee from a thermos with an engraving on it. What changed was the garage. He cleaned it out the week after the papers were signed. Out. Swept the floor, organized the shelves, put the legal pads in a cardboard box he labeled in marker and set on a high shelf. He stood in the middle of it for a long time and looked at the workbench where the 9th prototype had been born out of insomnia and grief and stubbornness and 12 years of Saturdays. Nora drove down from Columbus that weekend. She walked into the garage and stood next to him, and they looked at the empty space where the engine had been. "Do you miss it?" she asked. Out. Owen thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. "I'll build another one," he said. She laughed, the same laugh as her mother, the kind that made strangers turn around, and she put her arm through his, and they stood there in the clean garage in the afternoon light, and Owen Schaffer felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long, long time, something that felt finally like enough.